Hey guys, welcome back. Tonight, we're not rushing through history. We're drifting into one of the most misunderstood stories ever told. A story about unity before division, silence before confusion, and a tower that once tried to touch the sky. This is not the loud story you think you know. There are no explosions here. No sudden chaos, only mud, bricks, human hands, and a single moment when every person on Earth spoke the same language. Tonight, we'll walk through the quiet plains of ancient Mesopotamia, feel the texture of wet clay beneath bare feet, watch the slow rise of a mountain made by humans, and listen as one shared voice gently fractures into many. This is the entire story of the Tower of Babel, told slowly, softly, as a relaxing history documentary designed for deep sleep, reflection, and sleep. So, before you get comfortable, take a gentle moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if these deep sleep history stories help you find peace, sleep better, or simply reflect on our shared journey through time. Now, close your eyes. Let the noise of the modern world fade. Slow your breathing and allow yourself to drift as we begin our quiet journey into the entire story of the Tower of Babel, told slowly for sleep. Imagine a world where every human spoke with one voice, not just the same words, but the same understanding behind those words. A world where silence was not awkward and speech was never misunderstood. Long before towers reached for the sky, before language fractured into thousands of sounds, humanity lived inside a rare moment of unity. After the great flood had washed the world clean, the earth felt new again, quiet and open, as if history itself had paused to take a breath. In this calm age, people did not rush. They moved slowly across the land, guided by shared memory rather than fear. According to ancient Mesopotamian tradition, humanity journeyed eastward until they reached a broad, fertile plain known as Shinar, a place where rivers whispered instead of roared, and the soil welcomed human hands. This was ancient Mesopotamia before empires, before walls, before kings carved their names into stone. Here, language was not a tool of power, but a bridge of belonging, one of the earliest origins of language as shared meaning rather than division. People spoke and they were understood. They listened and nothing was lost in translation. There was comfort in that sameness, a nostalgic longing for unity that still echoes quietly in us today. In the soft mornings of Shinar, families woke together, not to alarms or urgency, but to light spilling gently across the plain. Words passed between them like warm breath in cool air, effortless and unexamined. No one argued about meaning, no one felt unheard. Silence was not empty, it was full of trust. This was a fresh start for humanity, a second beginning shaped by memory of loss, but free from its weight. The flood had taught them fragility, and unity felt like safety. In the evenings, as fires flickered low, stories traveled easily from mouth to ear, unchanged, unbroken. There was no need to write things down yet. Memory lived collectively. In this early chapter of history for sleep, time itself feels slower, heavier, kinder. The land of Shinar did not demand ambition, it invited presence. And within that presence, humans began to feel something subtle, almost imperceptible, the comfort of being many, but thinking as one. This was the calm before confusion, the quiet before ambition found a voice. No towers yet, no reaching upward, only a shared horizon and a single human sound carried gently across ancient Mesopotamia. In the land of Shinar, days passed without urgency, and that absence of haste shaped the human mind in gentle ways. When everyone speaks the same language, thought itself begins to feel shared. Ideas no longer belong to individuals, but drift softly from one person to another, settling wherever they are needed. This was not yet ambition, it was comfort. After the flood, safety mattered more than progress. Unity felt like shelter. In ancient Mesopotamia, where the horizon stretched wide and uninterrupted, people gathered not to compete, but to belong. Their words carried no sharp edges. Language flowed slowly, like the rivers beside them, reinforcing trust rather than dominance. This early chapter in the origins of language reminds us that speech was once a place of rest, not resistance. In the evenings, when the air cooled and the ground released its warmth, conversations grew quieter, softer. Voices lowered instinctively, as if honoring the fragile peace they lived within. No one raised their voice to be heard. Everyone already was. Children learned language not through correction, but through immersion. Words wrapped around them gently, forming identity without pressure. This was humanity before confusion, before misunderstanding carved distance between minds. Yet within this deep calm, something subtle began to change. Unity, once a source of safety, slowly became a mirror. When everyone thinks alike, the boundaries between self and group begin to blur. A shared language creates shared imagination, and shared imagination, given enough time, begins to ask quiet questions. What could we do together? What could we build that would last longer than memory? These were not loud thoughts. They arrived slowly, like the first breeze before a storm that no one yet senses. In the collective silence of Shinar, people looked at one another and saw sameness, not difference. That sameness felt reassuring. It also felt powerful. Without realizing it, humanity began to associate unity with permanence. If they stayed together, spoke together, acted together, perhaps nothing could scatter them again. This longing did not come from pride, but from memory. The flood was still close enough to be felt, even if it was rarely spoken aloud. Loss teaches people to cling. And so they clung to each other, to shared speech, to shared purpose, though that purpose was still undefined. This is why the story of the Tower of Babel begins not with rebellion, but with belonging. The nostalgic longing for unity is not something ancient alone. It lives quietly in us still, in our desire to be understood without effort. In this moment of history for sleep, the world feels held together by breath and sound. No tower stands yet, but the idea of standing together has begun to settle into the human heart, steady, calm, and unchallenged, waiting patiently for form.
Seasons passed quietly over the plain of Shinar. The sense of togetherness deepened into something almost tangible. People no longer thought in terms of days alone, but of continuity. When a single language binds many minds, time itself begins to feel less fragile. In ancient Mesopotamia, the earth did not shift beneath their feet, and the sky did not threaten. Everything felt stable. And stability invites a certain kind of thought, the thought of remaining. The idea did not arrive as ambition, it arrived as reassurance. What if we never had to move again? What if this place could hold us, not just for a generation, but for all who come after? These questions surfaced gently, passing through conversations without resistance, because everyone understood them in the same way. This is how shared language shapes shared destiny. The origins of language are not only about speech, but about agreement, about how quickly an idea can spread when no explanation is required. In Shinar, understanding was instant. A glance carried meaning. A pause completed a sentence. Slowly, the people began to imagine permanence, not power, not dominance, just continuity. Memory fades, stories change, but something built together might endure. This thought felt comforting, especially to a people shaped by loss. The flood had erased the past once. No one said it aloud, but everyone felt it. They did not want to scatter again. They did not want to forget one another. And so the first quiet impulse to build emerged, not upward yet, but inward, the desire to anchor humanity in one place. In this moment of history for sleep, the world still feels calm. There is no defiance here, no challenge to the heavens, only a human longing to remain known, to remain united, to remain heard in the same language. The land of ancient Mesopotamia offered materials that encouraged thought: clay beneath the feet, sun above, fire at night. Nothing sharp, nothing rushed. And so ideas formed slowly, patiently. If we shape the earth together, it might remember us. If we stay together, nothing can divide us. This was the quiet reasoning of a unified people. The nostalgic longing for unity now found direction, not yet in action, but in intention. A place where voices would never drift apart. A structure that would hold memory when speech eventually failed. The thought rested gently among them, accepted without debate. This is the final stillness before movement begins, the silence before hands reach down to gather clay. In the story of the Tower of Babel, this is the most human moment. Before pride, before confusion, before language fractures, a moment when unity feels like safety, permanence feels possible, and staying feels wiser than wandering. The night settles over Shinar once more. Fires dim, voices soften, and in the shared quiet, an idea sleeps among them, waiting to wake.
They didn't have stone, they had mud. And that single fact quietly shaped everything that followed. In the flat heart of ancient Mesopotamia, where mountains were distant memories and rock was rare, the ground beneath human feet was soft, yielding, and endlessly reusable. The soil of Shinar was thick with silt carried by the slow, patient rivers. When pressed between fingers, it held shape for a moment before relaxing again, cool and damp, neither resisting nor rushing. This was not the land of marble or granite. This was a land that invited touch. In the early days of Babylonian architecture, people learned to work with what the earth offered willingly. Mud became material. Patience became technique. Making mud bricks was not dramatic. It was repetitive, calming, almost meditative. Water was added slowly, straw mixed in gently. Hands sank into the mixture, feeling for balance rather than precision. The body learned the rhythm long before the mind questioned it. This is why the process feels so hypnotic even now. Each brick began as softness. Each shape was pressed into a mold, lifted carefully, and placed beneath the sun. There was no urgency. Drying took time, and time was something these people still trusted. In this chapter of History for Sleep, the satisfaction lies not in speed, but in consistency. Brick after brick, identical in size, similar in weight, quietly accumulating. The origins of Babylon architecture were humble in this way. Nothing rose quickly, everything emerged through repetition. As days passed, the sun hardened the outer skin of the bricks, leaving the inside cool and firm. Some were left as they were, sun-dried and sufficient for simple walls. Others were chosen for something more enduring. These bricks were moved toward heat. The invention of the kiln-fired brick changed everything without announcing itself. Fire did not rush, it transformed slowly. Bricks were stacked, heat built gradually, moisture released in silence. There was no spectacle, only the deep satisfaction of permanence forming quietly. The result was something new, a brick that could resist rain, weight, and time itself. In a land shaped by floods, durability mattered. This was not ambition yet, it was adaptation. To bind these bricks together, the people of Shinar used what seeped naturally from the earth: asphalt. Dark, sticky, heavy with smell. It softened when warmed, spread slowly, and cooled into a firm grip. Making mortar was as sensory as making bricks. Hands darkened, air thickened, movement slowed. Babylon architecture was built not with sharp edges, but with weight and warmth. Every action required closeness. Builders worked side by side, breathing the same air, moving at the same pace. Language guided hands gently. No commands shouted, no confusion. Everyone understood. The viral element here is not scale, but intimacy. Watching mud become brick, brick become wall, wall become structure, satisfies something deep in the human mind. This is boring history gold, the kind that calms the nervous system, the kind that feels earned rather than impressive. In ancient Mesopotamia, the tower did not begin as an idea reaching upward. It began as a hand pressing mud into shape again and again, grounded, patient, and completely human. As the first sun-dried bricks stacked quietly along the plain, another process unfolded nearby, slower, warmer, and deeper in tone. Fire entered the story, not as spectacle, but as discipline. In ancient Mesopotamia, the kiln was not a towering structure. It was low, rounded, close to the ground, designed to hold heat rather than display it. Clay bricks were arranged carefully inside, not tightly, but with enough space for breath, for air to move gently between them. This spacing mattered. Too close, and the heat would crack them. Too far, and the fire would lose its strength. Making mud bricks was tactile. Firing them was auditory and patient. Wood was fed slowly. Flames grew, settled, then grew again. The temperature rose without measurement, guided by experience rather than numbers. People learned to listen to fire, the sound of moisture escaping, the subtle change in color, the way heat hummed rather than roared. This was Babylon architecture forming, not through command, but through attention. Hours passed, sometimes days. No one hurried the kiln. Rushing would ruin everything. In this hypnotic process of making mud bricks permanent, time stretched and softened. Builders worked in shifts, not because they were tired, but because rhythm demanded continuity. One set of hands replaced another seamlessly. Language flowed between them like breath, coordinating without interruption. This is where unity became visible, not in words, but in motion. Hands moving in similar arcs, feet stepping back at the same time. Fire tended with shared intuition. Asphalt warmed nearby, releasing a heavy, grounding scent that clung to skin and fabric. When cooled, the bricks emerged transformed, heavier, darker. Their surface rang softly when touched, a muted sound of endurance. These bricks did not dissolve in rain. They did not soften with time. They held. And that holding mattered deeply to a people shaped by floods and movement. Babylon architecture grew from this quiet triumph, not the height of walls, but the confidence of material. The satisfying nature of this process lies in repetition without chaos. Brick after brick enters the kiln. Brick after brick exits changed but predictable. The mind relaxes when outcomes are certain. This is why boring history calms us. In the background, asphalt mortar waited, heated gently until it flowed, then spread slowly, filling gaps without haste. The act of binding was deliberate. Nothing spilled unnecessarily, nothing wasted. Builders pressed bricks together and felt resistance give way to cohesion. This was engineering without diagrams. Knowledge lived in bodies, in muscles, in breath, in shared pace. As structures began to rise, still low, still close to earth, no one spoke of towers yet, but the ground was learning to carry weight. Fire had taught clay to remember shape. Hands had learned trust. In this moment of history for sleep, the world feels warm, dim, and steady. The kiln glows softly, voices murmur low, bricks cool slowly in the night air, and somewhere between fire and earth, permanence takes its first quiet form. Over time, the making of bricks no longer felt like a task. It became a rhythm the body expected. Morning light arrived, hands moved. Evening settled, hands rested. In the plain of Shinar, labor did not interrupt life, it structured it. The sound of bricks being set down, the soft thud of clay meeting clay, the low murmur of shared speech blended into a steady background hum. This is where Babylon architecture truly took shape, not in design, but in habit. When people repeat the same careful action day after day, the action stops feeling temporary. It begins to feel permanent. Making mud bricks was no longer about producing enough. It was about continuing. Kilns burned regularly now, not as special events, but as quiet anchors of daily life. Fire was maintained, not watched. Asphalt was warmed, not prepared. Everything moved with familiarity. The satisfying process lay in predictability. Bricks dried, bricks fired, bricks cooled, bricks stacked. The ground slowly filled with structure, low and wide at first, spreading outward like calm thought rather than rising ambition. But even calm thought, given time, changes direction. As walls grew thicker, they grew more confident. Weight was tested, held, trusted. Builders noticed that fired brick could carry more than expected. Layers stacked without collapse. Mortar held firm. This realization did not excite them, it reassured them. In ancient Mesopotamia, reassurance was powerful. Floods had taught fear, stability taught courage, and courage, even quiet courage, shifts perspective. If the earth could hold this much, perhaps it could hold more. This was not a declaration, it was an observation, shared casually, understood immediately because everyone spoke the same language. This is how ideas spread in a unified world, not as arguments, but as shared noticing. The architecture of Babylon evolved organically, not because someone demanded height, but because nothing resisted it. The bricks themselves suggested possibility. The process invited continuation. The satisfying nature of this moment is subtle. No sudden change, no turning point announced, just one more layer added, then another, until the act of stacking upward felt as natural as stacking outward once had. Work had become memory. Hands knew what to do without instruction. Bodies leaned into repetition. Minds rested. This is why boring history for sleep works so well here. The brain recognizes safety in routine. In this steady labor, there was no urgency to finish, only the calm assumption that tomorrow would look much like today. Babylon architecture was still close to the ground, but the ground itself was changing. It had learned to carry intention. In the glow of evening fires, bricks formed shapes that stayed where they were placed. Children walked along low walls that had not existed the year before. Elders rested against surfaces that did not sink beneath their weight. Permanence was no longer an idea, it was something you could touch. And when permanence enters daily life, the question of how high something might go does not feel dangerous, it feels practical. The idea of height had not yet become symbolic, it was simply structural. If walls stand, walls can rise. And so, without drama, without declaration, the possibility of building upward settled into the shared imagination, not as ambition, not as defiance, but as continuation. The kiln glowed, the bricks cooled, the night air wrapped the plain of Shinar in stillness, and the work, steady and quiet, carried the future gently forward.
Babel didn't mean confusion. It meant gate of God. This is one of those quiet truths that changes how the entire story feels once you hear it. The word itself comes from ancient Mesopotamian language, from Bab Ilu, a phrase that did not describe chaos, but connection. A gate is not a wall. A gate is a passage. And Babylon was never imagined as a place of disorder by the people who lived there. It was imagined as a meeting point between earth and something higher. Understanding the etymology of Babel is the first step to understanding why the city mattered so deeply to its people. In the history of Babylon, names were not decorative, they were directional. They told you what a place was for. Babylon was a city designed not to confuse, but to gather, to welcome, to open. As the city expanded across the plain, its layout reflected this meaning quietly and consistently. Walls were built not only to protect, but to define belonging. Passing through a gate meant entering shared space, shared language, shared rhythm. Streets stretched wide and straight, guiding movement gently rather than forcing it. Homes clustered together, close enough for voices to carry, far enough for silence to remain comfortable. Daily life in ancient Babylon unfolded without spectacle. Citizens rose with the light, stepped into familiar paths, greeted one another with words that never needed explanation. The city breathed slowly. Markets opened not as bursts of noise, but as gradual gatherings. Goods were exchanged with conversation rather than urgency. The smell of baked bread mixed with warm clay and distant asphalt. Children learned the city by walking it, memorizing turns, thresholds, and doorways long before they learned numbers. To live in Babylon was to feel enclosed, but not trapped. The walls did not press inward, they held space.
This is why the idea of the city as the greatest on earth did not come from its height alone. It came from coherence. Everything fit. The city made sense. In a world that had once been scattered by flood, coherence felt sacred. The gate of God was not a claim of divinity, it was an orientation, a way of saying, this is where meaning passes through. This aha moment reshapes the Tower of Babel story entirely. Before confusion, before judgment, there was intention. Babylon was a city built to connect humans to each other first. The spiritual language came later. The gates were places of pause. People lingered there. Conversations happened there. News traveled through them. Gates are where inside meets outside. Babylon understood that deeply. Its streets funneled toward these points, creating a sense of arrival again and again throughout the day. In this chapter of History for Sleep, imagine walking slowly through the city at dusk. Light softens against brick. Shadows stretch across stone thresholds. The sound of footsteps echoes gently between walls that have heard thousands of similar days. Nothing feels rushed. Nothing feels accidental. The history of Babylon is not only about power or ambition, it is about design as comfort, about building a place where humans felt held. Babel, the gate of God, was not yet a challenge to heaven. It was a city that believed meaning could be approached step by step through shared space, shared language, and shared life.
So to understand why Babylon felt like the greatest city on earth, you don't need to stand atop its walls. You only need to walk through it slowly, as one of its citizens would have. Morning begins quietly inside the gate of God. Light enters the city not all at once, but in layers, slipping between walls, touching doorways, warming bricks that still hold the cool of night. A resident of ancient Babylon steps outside, not into chaos, but into familiarity. The street is already awake, though nothing feels hurried. Footsteps echo softly, not sharply, because the walls are close enough to listen. This is where the history of Babylon lives, not in monuments, but in repetition. Vendors arrange goods the same way they did yesterday. Hands know where to reach. Language moves gently between people, never raised, never strained. The city's design encourages this calm. Streets lead naturally toward gathering points, and gathering points dissolve naturally back into quiet paths. There is no need to ask where to go. The city tells you. Children weave between adults, learning boundaries without being taught. Elders pause often, resting against walls that feel solid, dependable. This solidity matters. It tells the body it is safe. In the etymology of Babel, the idea of a gate implies movement with meaning, and movement in Babylon always had meaning. Passing through a gate marked a transition from private to shared, from work to rest, from noise to quiet. Citizens crossed these thresholds many times a day, each time subtly reminded that they belonged to something larger. Markets form slowly, not explosively. Conversation matters as much as trade. A loaf of bread is exchanged with a story. Time stretches. The smell of clay, grain, and asphalt blends into something uniquely Babylonian. This is architecture experienced through the senses. Babylon architecture does not overwhelm the eye, it steadies it. Walls rise high enough to guide the gaze, but not so high that they intimidate. Everything feels measured, intentional, human-scaled. As the day warms, shadows shorten, and the city hums at a constant, gentle frequency. There are no sharp peaks of noise. Even labor sounds muted, absorbed by brick and earth. In the afternoon, life slows further. Doors close partially, streets empty slightly. The city breathes inward. This rhythm is what made Babylon feel eternal. Not size, not height, rhythm. A resident might sit near a gate in the late afternoon, watching light change.
Gates are places of observation. You see arrivals and departures without participating. This teaches patience. As evening approaches, families gather again. Fires are lit low, food is prepared simply. The city darkens gradually, never suddenly. Lamps glow along familiar paths, voices soften. In this moment, Babylon feels less like a city and more like a shared home. This is the viral aha moment many miss. Babylon was not impressive because it dominated, it was impressive because it functioned, because daily life unfolded without friction, because a citizen could live an entire day inside the gate of God without ever feeling lost. In this chapter of history for sleep, imagine lying down as night settles over Babylon. The walls hold warmth, the streets quiet completely. Somewhere, a gate creaks softly as it closes, and within those walls, thousands of people rest at once, connected by shared space, shared language, and shared trust, unaware that the world will one day remember their city for confusion rather than coherence.
There comes a moment in every great city when it stops feeling new and starts feeling inevitable. Babylon reached that moment quietly, not through conquest, not through proclamation, but through familiarity. The walls no longer felt recently built. They felt as though they had always been there. Streets bore the soft marks of countless footsteps, worn not by haste, but by consistency. In the history of Babylon, this was the peak of coherence. Everything aligned. The etymology of Babel as the gate of God no longer felt symbolic, it felt practical. Gates regulated life gently, opening and closing in rhythm with the sun. They framed the city's days, giving structure to time itself. Citizens did not speak of greatness, but they felt it. There is a particular calm that settles over a place when nothing feels provisional anymore. Babylon had reached that calm. Babylon architecture had matured into balance. Walls were strong enough to trust, streets wide enough to breathe, homes close enough to connect. The city neither expanded anxiously nor contracted defensively. It held its shape. This is what made it feel like the greatest city on earth to those who lived within it. Not scale alone, but reliability. A city that does not surprise you with danger. A city that teaches the body to relax. In this chapter of history for sleep, imagine standing at one of Babylon's gates at night. The city behind you was quiet, settled, known. Beyond the gate lies darkness and uncertainty. The contrast is gentle but clear. Inside, language flows. Outside, silence dominates. This boundary mattered. The gate was not a barrier to keep the world out, but a threshold that reminded citizens of what they shared inside. Daily life reinforced this repeatedly. People woke knowing where they would walk. They slept knowing where they belonged. The city absorbed ambition rather than amplifying it. If someone dreamed of more, the city did not oppose them, but it did not rush them either. This balance is rare, and it is fragile. Yet in this moment, Babylon held it perfectly. The greatest city on earth did not yet look upward for validation, it looked inward for continuity. That inward gaze shaped everything. The streets did not point toward a single monument, they wove a network. Power was diffused, not concentrated. Meaning was shared, not imposed. The aha moment here is subtle but profound. Babylon was great not because it reached for the heavens, but because it created a world where humans felt complete before doing so. The Tower of Babel story is often told backward, starting with confusion and ending with division. But here, at the end of this chapter, there is no confusion, only satisfaction, only stability, only a city at rest with itself. This is the calmest moment in the entire narrative, the moment when nothing seems missing. In ancient Mesopotamia, Under a wide, unchallenged sky, Babylon rested as a finished thought. Citizens moved through it without questioning its purpose. The gate of God stood not as a claim, but as a description. This is where meaning passed through. And because meaning flowed so easily, the question of height had not yet become dangerous. It had not yet become symbolic. It was simply waiting quietly at the edge of awareness. The city sleeps. The gates stand still. The walls hold warmth. And the story pauses here, balanced perfectly, just before the next idea rises.
A mountain built by human hands. That is how it first felt, long before anyone tried to name it. Rising from the flat breadth of the Babylonian plain, the structure did not look like a building so much as a deliberate interruption in the horizon. Everything around it lay low, wide, and calm. And then, there it was, stepped, layered, unmistakably upward. In the history of Babylon, this was the moment when space itself began to change. Not suddenly, not violently, but unmistakably. The Etymononke did not announce itself with sound, it announced itself with scale. A human-made mountain aligned carefully with the world around it, not leaning, not rushing, but standing exactly where it had been measured to stand. The idea of a ziggurat was not new in ancient Mesopotamia. Structures like the Ziggurat of had already taught people how to stack meaning in layers. But this was different. This was larger, more deliberate, more central. The Etymononke was placed at the heart of the city, not to dominate daily life, but to orient it. From any street, at the right angle, you could see it. It did not pull the eye aggressively, it waited for it. This is how grandeur works when it is confident. Each tier rose from the one below with mathematical precision, not decorative symmetry, but structural calm. Measurements mattered here. Proportions were repeated carefully, creating a rhythm that the eye could follow without strain. The base was dark, almost black, heavy with the color of earth and asphalt. Above it, a red layer warmed the structure, echoing brick and fire. Higher still, blue emerged, the color of sky, distant water, and evening light. These colors were not painted to impress, they were chosen to resonate. Earth below, fire in the middle, sky above. The climb had not yet begun, but the meaning already had. In this chapter of history for sleep, imagine standing at the base of the Etymononke just before dawn. The air is cool. The structure holds the night. You place a hand on the brick and feel stored warmth release slowly. The stairs do not rush upward. They turn gently, guiding the body into ascent without strain. This was not a sprint toward the heavens. It was a measured climb, step after step, pause after pause. The design insisted on slowness. As you rise, the city begins to change shape below. Walls soften, streets narrow into lines. Sound drops away. The Ziggurat of may have taught people how to build upward, but Etymononke taught them how to feel height. This was not about leaving the world behind, it was about seeing it differently. The viral power of this moment lies in its scale, but also in its restraint. A mountain built by human hands, yes, but one that asked you to climb slowly, to breathe, to notice. In the story of the Tower of Babel, this is where wonder replaces comfort. Not yet pride, not yet defiance, just the quiet realization that humans can shape space vertically, and that doing so changes how the world feels beneath your feet. The city below continues its rhythm. The mountain above waits. And somewhere between the two, the human spirit stretches gently, not reaching yet,
just learning how far upward calm can go.
The climb begins without ceremony. No trumpet, no announcement, only the body responding to space. The first steps of the Ziggurat feel wide and forgiving, built to accept weight without protest. Each stair is shallow, encouraging a rhythm that favors breathing over speed. In ancient Mesopotamia, this was intentional. Height was not meant to be conquered, it was meant to be approached. As you ascend the lower tier of the Etemenaki, the world remains close. The ground still feels present beneath your feet. The city sounds have not yet faded. You hear distant movement, soft voices, the quiet continuity of life below. The black tier absorbs light, holding the warmth of the day and releasing it slowly. It smells faintly of earth and asphalt, grounding, familiar. This is where the Ziggurat of Ur tradition still echoes strongly, reminding the climber that this structure grows from the same soil as everything else. When the path turns and rises again, color shifts. The red tier greets the eye gently, not vivid but deep. This is the color of fired brick, of kiln heat remembered long after the flames are gone. As you climb higher, your breathing deepens naturally, not from strain, but from awareness. The body notices the change. The city begins to soften below, no longer demanding attention. The precision of the structure becomes more apparent here. Each measurement repeats with care. Distances feel intentional. Nothing surprises the foot. This mathematical calm is part of the spiritual experience. Order creates trust. Trust allows the mind to rest. This is why the ascent feels soothing rather than overwhelming. In the history of Babylon, the Etemenaki was not simply tall, it was legible. The human mind could read it. As you reach the blue tier, the sky feels closer, not because you have reached it, but because your perspective has changed. Blue reflects light differently, cooling the eyes, slowing thought. The air moves more freely here, sound thins. What once felt like a city now feels like a pattern. Streets align, walls become shapes. The gate of God below is no longer a passage you walk through, but a symbol you can see. This is where the etymology of Babel gains depth. A gate is not only entered, it is also looked upon. The slow ascent allows reflection without demand. There is no summit rush, no final step yet. The stairs continue, patient, measured, reminding the climber that the act of rising matters more than arrival. This is the Vidler quiet power of the Ziggurat, grand scale experienced slowly, a mountain built by human hands that teaches restraint rather than triumph. In this chapter of history for sleep, imagine pausing on a landing halfway up. The sun lowers, the blue darkens, the red below warms, the black base holds steady. Each layer supports the next without complaint. This is not defiance of the sky, it is conversation with it. The city below continues to live, unaware of your stillness above. And in that separation, something subtle happens. The world feels ordered, not controlled, ordered. This is the moment when height becomes meaning, not as a challenge, but as a lens. You are not leaving the earth, you are learning how to look at it. And the stairs, endless and calm, wait for you to continue, one unhurried step at a time.
The higher you climb, the quieter everything becomes. Not suddenly, but gradually, as if the world below is choosing to step back on its own. The final tiers of the Etemenanki do not overwhelm. They simplify. The stairs narrow slightly, not to restrict, but to focus attention inward. Breathing becomes slower, deeper, more deliberate. The city is still there, but it no longer asks to be noticed. From this height, Babylon feels complete, contained, almost perfectly still. This is where the Ziggurat reveals its most subtle power. It does not make you feel small. It makes the world feel ordered. The blue tier reflects the sky so gently that the boundary between built and natural begins to soften. Brick and air share color. Light lingers longer. Shadows stretch less aggressively. The climb has taught the body to move with care, and now that care turns into awareness. In ancient Mesopotamia, this was the point of ascent, not arrival, but attunement. The Etemenanki was never meant to pierce the heavens. It was meant to bring the human mind into alignment with them. The mathematical precision you felt below now fades into intuition. Steps are still measured, but they feel instinctive. The structure holds you without demanding effort. This is why the story of the Tower of Babel cannot be understood only as ambition. Before there was pride, there was intimacy, a feeling that the distance between earth and sky could be contemplated, not conquered. Standing near the uppermost platform, the air feels lighter, cooler, cleaner. Sound has thinned to almost nothing. Even your own movement seems quieter. This silence is not emptiness, it is fullness without noise. The viral grandeur of this moment lies not in spectacle, but in restraint. A mountain built by human hands that stops short of excess. The city below continues to function, unaware of the calm above. Gates open and close. Fires are lit and dimmed. Life remains grounded. And yet from here it is possible to imagine something more. Not because the structure demands it, but because perspective invites it. This is the delicate threshold where meaning begins to shift. The gate of God is no longer just a city below. It is a pathway of thought, a question forming quietly. If we can stand here, what else might be possible? The question does not disturb the calm, it rests within it. In this chapter of history for sleep, imagine lingering near the top as evening approaches. The sky deepens. Stars emerge slowly, one by one, not as targets, but as companions. The ziggurat holds steady beneath you, its layers supporting not only weight, but thought. You do not reach out, you simply observe. This is the final peaceful moment before intention sharpens, before assent becomes desire, before desire seeks expression. The Etemenanki stands between worlds, not challenging either. And for a long, quiet breath, humanity stands with it, balanced perfectly between earth and sky.
When does ambition become arrogance? The question does not arrive loudly. It slips in quietly, almost unnoticed, carried on the same calm that once felt like unity. In Babylon, ambition did not begin as defiance, it began as reassurance, a desire to remain whole, a desire to stay together. After generations of stability, the memory of scattering had not vanished, it had simply settled deeper.
turning into a shared, unspoken fear. In the history of Babylon, this is where the tone begins to shift, not outwardly, inwardly. The tower had grown tall enough to change perspective, and perspective has a way of changing intention. Standing higher made the world feel smaller. Feeling smaller made people want to matter more. This is how hubris in mythology often begins, not with anger, but with anxiety. The fear was simple. If we stay low, we might be forgotten. If we spread out, we might lose one another. And so the idea took shape slowly, passed from mind to mind without resistance. Let us build higher, not to honor the heavens, but to secure ourselves beneath them. The motivation was not framed as a rebellion, it was framed as protection. A name mattered. A name meant continuity. To make a name was to leave a mark that could not be washed away like mud by another flood. In ancient Mesopotamia, stories lasted only as long as people stayed close enough to tell them. Height promised permanence. This is where a figure like Nimrod enters the story, not as a tyrant, but as a symbol, a hunter, a leader, a presence that embodied confidence at a time when confidence felt necessary. He did not shout commands, he represented momentum. Under his influence, ambition found a voice that sounded reasonable. Build so that we are not scattered. Build so that we are remembered. Build so that fear stays below us. The collective anxiety of the people gave these words weight. No one questioned the logic because everyone shared the fear. This is the subtle danger of unity. When everyone agrees, no one pauses. The tower was no longer just a structure. It became an answer to uncertainty, an answer to mortality. The psychological shift was complete, though few noticed it happening. What began as alignment with the sky quietly became competition with it, not openly, internally. The higher the tower rose, the more it reassured, and reassurance can be addictive. In this chapter of History for Sleep, imagine the city at night during this decision. The Ziggurat stands silent, fires flicker below. Conversations soften but do not stop. People speak of safety, of legacy, of togetherness. The word God is still spoken, but less often. The word name is spoken more. This is not evil, it is human. Hubris in mythology is rarely about hatred, it is about fear wearing confidence as a mask. The decision to build higher did not feel like crossing a line, it felt like stepping forward. And because it felt calm, because it felt shared, because it felt necessary, no one noticed when ambition quietly turned into arrogance. The tower waited, and the people, still united, took one more step upward, unaware that the meaning of height had already changed.
Fear rarely announces itself as fear. In Babylon, it wore the language of care. The desire to stay together sounded kind. The urge to build higher sounded prudent. After all, what could be wrong with wanting continuity? In the quiet mind of the city, the memory of scattering lingered like a shadow that lengthened at dusk. No one spoke of it directly, but everyone felt it. The higher the tower rose, the further that shadow seemed to fall beneath their feet. Height became a way to press fear downward, to keep it out of sight. This is the quiet psychology behind hubris in mythology. It is not a sudden arrogance, but a slow preference for certainty over humility. The people of ancient Babylon did not wake up wanting to challenge the heavens. They woke up wanting to make sure they would never be separated again. Language had kept them together so far. Shared work had bound them. The tower promised to do the same, but more permanently. This is where Nimrod's presence became more than symbolic. As a king, he did not need to force agreement. Agreement already existed.
His role was to give shape to what everyone already felt. Under his guidance, fear was translated into action. Not frantic action, organized action. The tower was framed as a safeguard, a center, a place that would anchor the people no matter how the world shifted. In the history of Babylon, this is the moment when unity stopped being an end and became a means. Togetherness was no longer valued for its own sake, but for what it could produce. The anxiety of the people was collective, and collective anxiety feels logical when shared. No one wanted to be the first to question it. Questioning felt like betrayal. If we build high enough, we will never have to leave. If we are seen from afar, we will never be lost. These thoughts moved gently through the city, passing through conversations, settling into plans, hardening into expectation. The tower absorbed these hopes silently, stone by stone. From a distance, nothing looked different. The ziggurat still rose with calm symmetry. Work still followed routine. But beneath the stones, intention had shifted. The motivation was no longer alignment with the sky, but resistance to the unknown. This is the fragile line where ambition crosses into arrogance, not because of pride, but because of fear. The people did not notice the change because it felt protective. The tower soothed them. It promised that their unity could be engineered, that permanence could be built, that the world could be held still if they reached high enough. In this chapter of history for sleep, imagine the city during these days. The nights are quiet. The air is warm. The tower stands tall, reassuring in silhouette. People sleep more easily knowing it is there. But sleep carries dreams, and dreams reveal unease. Some dream of floods returning. Some dream of endless plains with no walls. These dreams are shared in the morning, dismissed gently, then buried beneath more bricks. The fear does not disappear, it is simply covered. Hubris in mythology is often misunderstood as boldness. Here, it is closer to desperation wrapped in calm. The decision to keep building is renewed again and again, not with speeches, but with habit. One more layer, one more stair. Each addition feels necessary. Each addition feels harmless. The tower grows, and with it grows the belief that safety can be stacked, that unity can be locked in place. The people remain together, but their togetherness has changed shape. It is no longer free, it is reinforced, and reinforcement, while strong, is brittle. The stones hold, the fear waits, and somewhere within the rising structure, the seeds of division rest quietly, unseen, preparing for the moment when unity can no longer contain them.
Every decision has a moment when it hardens, not into action, but into certainty. In Babylon, that moment arrived without ceremony. There was no final vote, no single declaration. The decision to build higher simply stopped being questioned. When a choice no longer needs defending, it has already won. The tower stood tall enough now to feel permanent, and permanence has a way of convincing people that it was always meant to be. This is where Nimrod's presence became unmistakable, not as a ruler issuing commands, but as a figure around whom certainty gathered. His name circulated with the project, not as an order, but as reassurance. If he believed in the tower, then the tower must be right. This is how hubris in mythology often consolidates itself, through trust rather than force. The people of Babylon did not feel controlled, they felt aligned. And alignment, once absolute, leaves no room for reflection. The language of the city shifted subtly. Conversations no longer asked why, only how much higher, how much faster, how much stronger.
The fear of being scattered remained, but it was now buried beneath confidence. Confidence, when shared widely, feels like truth. In ancient Mesopotamia, myths often warned that this is the most dangerous moment, not when people are divided, but when they are united around the wrong certainty. The tower absorbed more than labor, it absorbed belief. Each brick carried intention, each layer carried agreement. The Atemenanki no longer felt like a bridge between earth and sky. It felt like a claim, not spoken aloud, but felt deeply. We can do this. We should do this. We must do this. Nimrod's role, whether historical or symbolic, mattered less than what he represented. A human figure large enough to mirror the scale of the project. Under his shadow, the tower stopped being a shared experiment and became a shared destiny. In this chapter of history for sleep, imagine the city just after this threshold is crossed. The nights are still calm, the stars are still gentle, but something has tightened. Not in sound, not in movement, but in intention. The tower is worked on without hesitation. The question of stopping does not arise. Unity has become momentum, and momentum does not pause to examine itself. This is the final quiet moment before consequence. The hubris in mythology here is complete, not because of defiance, but because of certainty. The people believe they know what they are doing, and belief removes doubt. The fear that once motivated caution now fuels persistence. The tower rises not to praise, but to preserve, not to honor, but to endure. The irony rests quietly within this choice. By trying to secure unity forever, the people have placed it under strain. By building to avoid scattering, they have set the stage for it. But none of this is visible yet. The structure still stands, the city still functions, the people still speak with one voice. The decision feels finished, and because it feels finished, it cannot be undone. The tower awaits above them, patient, massive, and full of meaning that has shifted beyond awareness. The point of no return has been reached, softly, without alarm, and in that softness, the story prepares to change direction, carrying the city, the people, and their certainty toward a moment they cannot yet imagine.
There was no explosion, no collapse, no moment that demanded panic. The fracture began quietly, almost politely, woven into the rhythm of an ordinary morning. The bricklayer asked for mortar, but the mixer heard stone. The request was simple. The misunderstanding was small. So small, in fact, that no one noticed it as the beginning of anything. In the history of Babylon, this is the most unsettling detail. The confusion of tongues did not arrive as chaos. It arrived as hesitation, a pause, a second glance, a brief moment of uncertainty where certainty had always lived. Words that once moved smoothly between people now landed differently, heavier, unfamiliar. The origin of languages, as remembered in this story, begins not with invention, but with separation. A familiar sound no longer carried the same meaning. At first, people assumed fatigue, long days of work, heat, dust. The tower was tall now, and tiredness made sense. But the moments multiplied. Requests were repeated. Gestures grew more animated. Clarifications failed. The psychological discomfort crept in slowly. Something was wrong, but nothing was broken. That made it harder to name. This is the quiet horror at the heart of linguistics history. When language shifts, reality shifts with it. Work began to slow, not because of refusal, but because of confusion. Tools were passed incorrectly. Measurements no longer aligned. Instructions sounded familiar, yet strange. The tower did not resist them.
it simply waited. Groups began to form naturally, without intention. People gravitated toward those who still understood them, not out of preference, but out of relief. To be understood, even partially, became precious. The city, once unified by a single voice, now murmured in many. Not loudly, softly, carefully. People spoke less, listening harder, hoping recognition would return. But recognition did not. The confusion of tongues spread gently, like a fog that does not alarm, only obscures. In this chapter of history for sleep, imagine the tower during this time. Work pauses in places, resumes in others, then pauses again. No one issues an order to stop. It simply happens. Momentum dissolves without resistance. The Atemenanki stands unchanged, its height intact, its meaning suddenly unstable. The fear that once drove unity now transforms into isolation. Not dramatic isolation, but subtle distance. Standing close no longer guarantees connection. This is the most painful shift of all. Humans can endure hardship together, but misunderstanding fractures something deeper. The origin of languages here is not celebrated, it is mourned quietly. People do not realize they are witnessing the birth of diversity. They only feel the loss of sameness. Families notice that children repeat words differently. Friends realize their jokes no longer land. The familiar rhythm of speech breaks into uneven patterns. Some sounds feel sharper, others softer, none fully align. The tower begins to empty without announcement. Tools are left where they are. Fires burn lower. Conversations shorten. People retreat to those who sound like home. In the history of Babylon, this is how great projects end. Not with destruction, but with absence. The psychological horror lies not in noise, but in silence where shared meaning once lived. The city does not fall, it loosens. The Atemenanki does not collapse, it is abandoned gently, almost respectfully. And as the sun sets, the many new languages settle into the air, each carrying fragments of the old, none carrying it whole. The fracture is complete, not because people leave, but because they no longer arrive at one another.
As understanding fractured, people began to move differently. Not away at first, but sideways. They stood closer to those whose words still made sense, whose sounds still landed softly in the mind. These movements were not planned, they were instinctive, guided by the quiet relief of recognition. In the unfolding linguistics history of this moment, identity began to form around sound. A familiar rhythm in speech felt like home. An unfamiliar one felt distant, even if the speaker stood nearby. The origin of languages here is inseparable from the origin of groups. Workspaces reorganized themselves without instruction. Small clusters formed around shared phrases, shared tones, shared pauses. Communication within these circles flowed again, imperfect but functional. Outside them, meaning thinned. The city did not split overnight, it segmented gently, like water finding new channels. The tower, once the center of everything, became a backdrop. People passed it less often. When they did, they rarely looked up. There was no anger toward it, only fatigue. The effort required to rebuild understanding felt heavier than the effort required to build height. This is the soft tragedy of the confusion of tongues. It did not provoke conflict, it induced retreat. Families adjusted first. Parents repeated words slowly. Children answered in new patterns. Generations drifted apart by sound alone. Friends who once shared stories now shared silence, smiling politely when meaning failed. In ancient Babylon, daily life continued,
But it no longer converged. Markets grew quieter, not because people stopped trading, but because negotiation became careful, limited to those who shared speech. Gestures replaced words, then proved insufficient. The city learned restraint. The psychological horror here is not fear, but loneliness. To be surrounded and yet unreachable. To hear voices and not belong to them. In this chapter of history for sleep, imagine walking through Babylon during these days. You hear many languages, but none dominate. Each group speaks softly, conserving understanding. The tower stands unchanged, its tiers catching light as they always have. But it no longer organizes the city's movement. The center has dissolved. Meaning now lives in pockets. The people do not mourn aloud, they adapt. Adaptation is quieter than grief. The Etemenanke becomes a reference point rather than a destination. Children point to it and ask questions that cannot be fully answered. Adults glance at it and remember a time when words did not separate them. The confusion of tongues continues its gentle work. Some groups drift toward the edges of the city, drawn by familiarity and landscape that matches their new speech rhythms. Others remain near the center, holding on to shared space, even as shared meaning fades. No one commands departure, no one enforces staying. Movement happens naturally, like breath. This is how scattering begins, not as exile, but as preference. The origin of languages unfolds not as celebration, but as necessity. Each language becomes a shelter. Inside it, people can rest. Outside it, they must strain. The tower, abandoned without ceremony, witnesses all of this silently. Its height remains impressive, but its purpose has evaporated. It was built to prevent scattering. It now overlooks it. This irony is never spoken. It does not need to be. In the calm of these days, Babylon transforms from a single city into many beginnings. The fracture does not destroy, it redistributes. And as voices find their own circles, the old unity fades into memory, leaving behind a landscape of gentle separations, each carrying echoes of the language that once bound them all.
Eventually, there came a day when no one climbed to the tower anymore. Not because it was forbidden, and not because it was dangerous, but because it no longer belonged to anyone's future. The confusion of tongues had completed its quiet work. Communication still existed, but it had narrowed, settling into separate channels that rarely crossed. The tower, once the shared project of all, now stood outside every group's story. In the long unfolding of linguistics history, this is the moment when language stops being a bridge and becomes a boundary. People passed the Etemenanke without ceremony. Some remembered helping to build it, others had only heard stories, but none felt called to continue. The origin of languages, as lived rather than studied, carried people away from the center in gentle arcs. Paths diverged not with urgency, but with familiarity. Each group followed the sounds that felt easiest to carry forward. The city thinned, not emptied, but stretched. Houses were left standing, fires unlit, tools untouched. No one claimed them. Ownership mattered less than understanding now. The tower watched over these changes with unchanging patience. Its tiers caught the sun, then the dusk, then the stars, as they always had. But meaning had moved on. This is how abandonment truly happens, not through destruction, but through irrelevance. The tower did not fall. It remained complete, tall, and silent. That silence, however, was different from the silence of anticipation it once held. It was the silence of conclusion. In this chapter of history for sleep, imagine standing near the base of the tower in its final days as a gathering place. The air is calm, the ground still warm. You hear distant voices, but none converge here. The center no longer calls. The people who remain nearby speak softly among themselves, no longer addressing the structure. Children play without asking what it is for. Adults glance at it without explanation. The tower has become part of the landscape rather than the purpose of it. The psychological weight of isolation settles gently across the city. People are not angry, they are tired. Tired of misunderstanding, tired of effort. It is easier to move than to translate, and so movement continues. Some leave in small groups, some linger, some stay and rebuild elsewhere. History does not record their names, it records their dispersion. The tower becomes a marker, not of failure, but of transition. In the mythology of Babel, the fracture is often framed as punishment, but lived from within, it feels more like release. Release from a project that no longer fits the human mind as it has become. Language has reshaped thought. Thought has reshaped belonging. The tower's height, once comforting, now feels unnecessary. The sky remains vast, the earth remains wide. There is room to go. As night falls, the city grows quieter. The many languages drift outward, carried by footsteps into the dark. Each one holds a fragment of the old unity, transformed by distance and time. The origin of languages is complete not in separation alone, but in motion. Humanity moves on, not in anger, but in quiet adaptation. The tower stands behind them, a completed structure without a future, watching as history begins to unfold away from it. And in that stillness, the story prepares to soften once more, shifting from confusion toward dispersal, carrying the listener gently onward as the ancient world exhales and changes shape.
What remains of the tower today? Just a wet trench. The question feels almost unfair after everything that once stood here. Where a mountain of brick reached toward the sky, there is now silence pressed into the earth. The centuries did not tear the tower down in anger, they simply settled on it, layer by layer, until height returned to ground. This is how history often ends, not with collapse, but with forgetting. When modern travelers first walked these plains, they did not see a tower. They saw uneven soil, damp channels, fragments that resisted meaning. Babylon had become a rumor beneath the dust. In the early 20th century, archaeology discovery did something quiet and profound. It did not restore the tower, it listened for it. Robert Goldaway arrived not with certainty, but with patience. He understood that what remained of Babylon would not announce itself. It would have to be uncovered gently, inch by inch, through mud that still remembered water. Trenches were dug, earth was lifted, bricks emerged, softened by time, stamped with markings that once organized a city. The foundations of the Etemenaki revealed themselves not as grandeur, but as absence shaped into form, a rectangle of damp earth, a suggestion of scale. Archaeology discovery often feels like reunion, but here it felt like mourning. Each measurement confirmed how vast the tower had been and how completely it had been erased. The origin of this loss was not violence, it was time. Goldaway documented walls, traced outlines, and stood where stairs had once turned upward. There was no echo of voices, only wind. This is the melancholy at the heart of archaeology, to know precisely what once existed and to see precisely how little remains. In this chapter of History for Sleep, imagine the archaeologist pausing at the edge of a trench. The soil is dark and wet. Water pools where stone once anchored ambition. He does not rush, he records, he respects the silence. Babylon, which once demanded attention, now receives it quietly. The dust of centuries has softened judgment. There is no blame here, only continuity. Even Alexander the Great, centuries earlier, is said to have walked among these ruins, seeing not a city, but the remains of one. He planned to rebuild, to raise Babylon again, but time intervened once more. The ruins resisted revival. They had already completed their story. Standing there, one feels the strange reversal of scale. The tower once dwarfed humanity. Now humanity bends down to find it. The wet trench tells a story without words. It reminds us that height is temporary, but ground is patient. In uncovering the foundations, Goldaway did not bring Babel back. He revealed where it had rested and where it had returned. The melancholy of lost history settles gently here, not as regret, but as acceptance. The tower lived, the tower ended, and the earth held it, waiting until someone listened again.
The trench remains, damp and unassuming, long after the excitement of discovery fades. Visitors come expecting height, expecting drama, and instead they find a lesson written in soil. This is where archaeology discovery reaches its most human point. It does not reconstruct ambition, it reveals consequence. Long before modern excavation tools traced these foundations, another figure is said to have stood here, looking not at a tower, but at its absence. Alexander the Great arrived with armies and visions of empire, yet even he paused before Babylon's remains. Ancient sources suggest he intended to rebuild the city, to restore its grandeur, to make it live again. The plan itself feels telling. Great builders are always drawn to great ruins. But the ground did not cooperate. Debris resisted clearing. Water lingered where brick once stood. Time, once again, declined the invitation. The ruins had already finished speaking. This moment stretches across centuries, binding conqueror and archaeologist in the same realization. Height cannot be summoned back once it has returned to Earth. In the history of archaeology, this is the melancholy thread that repeats. Discovery does not reverse loss, it illuminates it. Standing near the foundations, one feels the scale of human effort compressed into a shape the eye can barely register. Measurements exist, diagrams exist, but sensation belongs to absence. The origin of languages, the rise of the tower, the confusion of tongues, all resolve here into a simple truth. What endures is not structure, but trace. In this chapter of History for Sleep, imagine dusk settling over the site. The light softens, the trench fills with shadow. The wind moves across the plain as it has for millennia. No voice rises to claim meaning. Meaning arrives on its own, gently. The sadness of the ruins is not despair, it is humility. The tower once promised permanence, the earth answered with patience. Archaeology discovery, when approached slowly, becomes a conversation across time. The ground offers fragments, and we bring questions. Sometimes the answer is only silence. That silence is complete. It does not accuse. It does not warn loudly. It simply reminds. Alexander's unrealized plan and Koldewey's careful documentation meet in this shared stillness. One sought to rebuild the past, the other sought to understand it. Both learned the same lesson. History cannot be climbed again. It can only be approached, listened to, and left as it is. The Tower of Babel, reduced to a wet trench, carries more weight now than it did as a mountain of brick. It no longer asks to be finished, it asks to be remembered accurately. And accuracy brings calm. As centuries pass, the site changes little. Seasons repeat, rain gathers, dust settles. The story remains, not in height, but in depth. In the gentle sorrow of archaeology, we find rest. The ambition that once strained upward has softened into knowledge. The fracture that once scattered humanity has become diversity carried forward. The dust of centuries covers everything evenly, and under that dust, the tower rests, complete in its incompletion, teaching quietly that even the grandest reach will one day return to ground, where understanding begins again.
Though we speak many tongues, we still share one history. This thought arrives gently, like the final breath before sleep. The story of the Tower of Babel does not end in noise, it ends in quiet understanding. Across the centuries, languages multiplied, paths diverged, and people learned to name the world in countless ways. Yet beneath all those names lies a single human impulse, the desire to connect, to be understood, to belong. In this final chapter, the echo of Babel is not a warning, it is a reminder. The tower once rose because people feared being scattered. It fell into memory because people learned to move, adapt, and carry meaning with them. In the calm after the story, we can see that confusion did not destroy humanity, it reshaped it. The origin of languages became the beginning of diversity. What felt like loss became expansion. This is why the tale endures in bedtime stories for adults and in every relaxing history documentary that seeks to soothe rather than alarm. The lesson is not about punishment, it is about humility. Height does not guarantee closeness, shared ground does. The wind that once passed through the streets of Babylon still moves across the ancient sands. It does not speak in words, it carries memory. In this chapter of History for Sleep, imagine that wind drifting softly at dusk. It brushes over the trench where the tower once stood. It smooths the dust. It erases footprints gently, the way time always does. The silence that remains is not empty, it is full of everything that has been said before. Each language ever spoken adds a layer to that silence, making it richer, deeper, more complete. We often think of Babel as a fracture, but echoes do not come from nothing. They come from sound that once filled space. The echo of Babel reminds us that connection does not require sameness, it requires listening. As the desert cools, stars appear one by one, steady and unhurried. They watched the tower rise, they watched it fade. They now watch us, scattered yet linked by history. The sands of Iraq hold this story without judgment. They do not rush it, they let it rest. This is where the narrative slows completely. Breathing becomes even, thought softens. The human urge to reach upward settles into the human need to rest. In the end, the Tower of Babel teaches a simple truth. No matter how many tongues we speak, we still share one origin, one earth, one long memory. Let that thought remain as the mind loosens its grip on the day. Let the echo fade,
not into silence, but into sleep.
Now the story no longer needs words. The wind takes over. It moves slowly across the ancient plains of Iraq, brushing the surface of the earth with the same patience it has practiced for thousands of years. There is no urgency in its motion, no destination, only continuation. The sands respond gently, shifting almost imperceptibly, covering and uncovering the traces of human presence in a quiet rhythm older than memory. This is where the echo of Babel finally dissolves, not erased, but absorbed. The tower does not rise here anymore. It rests, indistinguishable from the ground that holds it. The wet trench darkens as night settles. The air cools. Sound thins until even thought feels distant. In this moment, history releases its grip. The ambition that once strained upward has softened into stillness. Languages remain, countless and alive, but their origin no longer weighs heavily. They drift through the world like variations of the same breath. This is why relaxing history documentary storytelling ends here, not with explanation, but with rest. The desert understands something humans often forget. Nothing needs to last forever to matter. The wind does not ask what was built here. It simply moves on, carrying grains of sand that once touched brick, once touched hands, once touched dreams. In bedtime stories for adults, this is the moment when the mind is allowed to stop searching for meaning and simply receive calm. The stars above Babylon burn quietly, indifferent and constant. They watched the tower rise. They watched it fade. They will watch long after memory itself changes shape. There is comfort in that distance. It reminds us that being human is brief, but being part of history is gentle. As the wind passes over the final outlines of the trench, it smooths them, making edges softer, shadows longer, contrast lower. The scene becomes simple: earth, air, darkness, rest. No language is required here. Understanding is no longer something to reach for. It arrives naturally when effort ends. Let your breathing slow with the wind. Let each thought become lighter, less defined, until it blends into the quiet around it. The echo of Babel has traveled far enough. It does not need to return. It lives now in every word spoken softly, in every pause between sentences, in every moment when listening matters more than speaking. The ancient sands hold this truth without judgment. They do not remember conflict, they remember time. And time here is kind. As the camera fades to black, there is no loss, only completion. The story has reached its final resting place. The tower sleeps beneath the earth. The wind continues above it, and you are free to rest as well, carried gently by the same silence that has held humanity since the very beginning.